Today, I'm going to be covering Chapter 7, the Era of Federal Social Services. So in this video, I'm going to focus on the impacts from the four presidents during this time: President Truman, Eisenhower, Kennedy, and Johnson. So I'm going to start off with President Truman, who served from 1945 to 1952. During his time in office, he initiated very few social reforms. He was faced with a lot of opposition from conservatives as well as the American Medical Association, and was therefore unable to enact any national health legislation. This is President Eisenhower, who served 2 terms from 1953 to 1960. U.S. policies were very conservative during this time. Because of all of the resources spent on the emerging Cold War, little resources were left for a domestic and social agenda. Furthermore, he was hesitant to even support the civil rights movement. Overall, during Truman and Eisenhower's presidencies, though there was little social reform, it was still characterized as a time of great economic prosperity. Many suburbs and interstate highway systems were built during this time. However, lots of social problems were emerging. Real reform began when President Kennedy took office in 1961. He made social reform a major part of his campaign by promising to help the elderly with their medical bills, developing programs for those in poverty in the Appalachian region and inner cities, and to get the country moving again. After World War II, America experienced an economic boom, due in part to rising wages, circulating funds from blossoming social programs, and government partnerships with the housing and automobile industries. However, major problems also emerged. Minority groups experienced severe poverty, violations of their fundamental rights, overt discrimination, and extreme economic inequality. These policies, or lack thereof, greatly affected the vulnerable populations at this time, which included African Americans, Latinos, First Americans, women, persons with mental illnesses, and the LGBTQ community. The Progressive Era and the New Deal showed that social reform was possible in America, but it was really the civil rights movement that pushed us towards social reform. Martin Luther King Jr. showed the nation that we could fight injustice with peaceful protests, even though the responses were violence, unfair court rulings, intimidation, and even murder. Although Kennedy's presidency was short-lived, he established a large policy agenda for his successor, including civil rights legislation, war on poverty, the food stamp program, Medicare, federal aid to public schools, and tax reforms, in which Johnson had mostly great success in achieving. Like the Cold War, the war in Vietnam left many resources and funds depleted, leaving little for domestic and social reforms. Many, including President Johnson himself, noted that going into war in Vietnam was one of his biggest downfalls as president. This war cost not only many lives, but also a lot of money. This era was still considered a success, as many programs like Medicare, Medicaid, food stamps, civil rights, and housing programs still exist today.